Okay, hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
And I'm Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
All right, Josh.
So
Here we go.
So we've been doing just like, oh, a new movie came out this week. Let's talk about that. A new movie came out this week. Let's talk about that. And that's been about the last 2 months. So it's been just like a mad rush, the end of Oscar qualification time. And so now all that's over. So we were trying to like figure something out to where we could change it up a little bit and watch a movie maybe that didn't come out within the last month. So I personally have never seen an Andrei Tarkovsky movie. And have you seen one before now?
No,
Okay.
well, no, not before now. No.
Okay. So I was like, all right, I there's like a handful of movies I sent Paul a list, and I was like, okay, I would like to watch one of these movies. And they're on Criterion Channel, so you can watch this movie on Criterion Channel. And the movie we're talking about this week is Stalker. And it's not one of Tarkovsky's earlier movies. In fact, it's his last movie that he made in the Soviet Union. And it came out in 1979. But this is how Criterion Collection described it. It's set in a near future, and it's a metaphysical journey through an enigmatic post-apocalyptic landscape. So that's very vague, but it's essentially about a man who is paid by 2 other guys to sneak them into a forbidden zone that was somehow affected by some sort of supernatural arrival in the past. And that is what the movie's about. But it's about all kinds of other things, and it's pretty trippy. It's kind of a long sit. It's about 2 hours and 45 minutes. And the pacing on this film is very deliberate. That's the nicest way to say it. But I actually really enjoyed it. What did you think about the film?
Well, first of all, IMDb trips me out because I read a lot about this film after I watched it because I was sort of obsessed a little bit.
Yeah.
So I had to know what other people thought. And I read a ton of stuff. And then I read the IMDb description. It says, a guide leads 2 men through an area known as the Zone to find a room that grants wishes. That's it. I was like, you know what? If that doesn't sum up the narrative, I don't know what it is. Because that is the narrative. And here's my description. First of all, I would like to state spoilers up front. Here's why. Not that anything can be told in this movie is going to ruin anything if you're willing to sit through it. But I would not want to know about something before I experienced it in this film. Some of the imagery and some of the stuff that happens, it's like a really good escape room. You have to figure things out as you're going along, and you could be right, you could be wrong. Some of the things I started to feel about it sort of turned into truths in the film, and some didn't. But this is how I felt about it. I felt like I was in a museum going from room to room to room, looking at paintings, looking at sculptures, and not really understanding what that big blue blob over there was, but understanding what that statue was, not really understanding why Tiffany lamps are beautiful, but I kind of like it because it's pretty and the light looks nice. And then I look over at this abstract piece and I'm really not sure what that is, but it's making my heart palpitate. You come out of a museum and you never say to yourself, did you like it? You just have the experience. You experience each room and each exhibit for whatever it is, whatever you feel. I mean, sure, you can have those headset tours where people explain stuff, but they really don't on those. They sort of give history, and some of the exhibits that are actual interactive experiences I've been to have had long explanations on headsets. It kind of ruined it for me because I wanted to experience it. I want to feel what I felt, and then I want to be told what it was supposed to be and see if I got it right.
They're kind of ruining it for you because they're saying like, this is what other people say that it is. This is what whatever, in your analogy, this is what this art critic has decided that this painting is about. But when you come to it, you have your own experiences. You have your own point of view. And so you're able to experience, without knowing any of that stuff, you're able to go through that and pay attention to certain things that maybe the art critic didn't pay attention to, or it's going to hit you in a different way than it would hit somebody who is used to looking at paintings. And in the same way, this film, it allows you the time and the space to evaluate and to soak things in and to actually become a part of the environment as opposed to just like cut, 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 cut. I mean, the average length of a shot in this film is about 1.5 minutes. Now, there's some shots that are 5 minutes long. There's some shots that are 10 seconds long. But the average is so much longer than what we're used to. I mean, it's like the antithesis of a Michael Bay film. It just allows you to kind of like live in each of these shots. And in some ways, at least it made me uncomfortable. Once I've sat in that for a while, I'm like, what does this mean? How am I supposed to be taking this? What am I supposed to be gathering from this? And I was able to go through multiple iterations of thoughts instead of being like, well, maybe it's this. And it's like, oh, well, we got something else
Zoom,
going
yeah.
on. Okay,
Right.
well, then it must have been that. And then it allowed you to breathe, which was new and interesting to me. And it helped that some of the shots were just insanely beautiful, and the sound design was so intricate and so interactive with the score, where you couldn't tell when it was a trolley car clicking and when it was synthetic music that had been made. They just kind of like merged in and moved in and out of each other. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a sensory overload, even though there are certain scenes where not a lot happens. And I wrote something down that it was like, I don't feel like I would have been able to experience the film in the same way 10 years ago or as a high school student or something. Now, maybe there's high school students out there that would completely dig this and love it, and that's awesome. But I feel like seeing all the films that I've seen up to this point has kind of gotten me to where I really do appreciate what is happening and the tricks and the tools and the ways that Tarkovsky is manipulating the audience in such a subtle way, but it's powerful.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And the analogy about the art museum is that it's so funny that we come out of a movie and people want to know what we thought of it. Instead of saying, what did you feel during that moment? You're supposed to give a whole a feeling about what happened to you during the experience. And I don't think that that's fair. And I also don't think it's fair for a film like this to be analyzed on how you felt about it afterwards, because beginning, middle, and end all made me feel different all the way throughout the whole entire film. And if I was in a certain room in a museum and somebody said, hey, what do you think of that painting over there? Then I could say, well, it's making me feel uncomfortable because I don't understand that black thing there or that red thing there or that yellow streak. What does that mean? But it's making me feel uncomfortable. Or how you feel about this statue? Oh, well, let's look at it 360 degrees. It's a completely different experience than going to a film. But for whatever reason, I felt like I was watching a living museum when I was watching this film. I don't know how else to put it. And you're right. It's absolutely gorgeous. Some of the cinematography is just beautiful. It's breathtaking. But it's all kind of muddy, soaked with water, which is something I need to talk to you about, because the water in this film was like, what's going on? It has this apocalyptic look to it. It all looks like a town that's been overgrown and not lived in for decades, but it was beautiful. And then there were things, and I'm jumping way ahead, when they get closer to the room, finger quotes, and they have that kind of muddy, watery pond in front of them, and it has all the beakers and all of the glass things floating in. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? But you're right. The sound editing and the sound design is brilliant, because the way that they echo when they're in the zone and the way that things clink together and the way that you think it was the dog panting, but was that the dog panting? Was that the train? Was that the little girl screaming? Was that somebody else screaming? What is that? And then there's this thing in the sound design where it sounds like it's coming from underneath the film, or it's coming from behind the camera, the sound effect is. And I was like, what is that? Is that supposed to be a fourth person in the zone? Is that supposed to represent some? Yeah, it was tripping me out. I thought 2 hours and 45 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm a little addicted to my phone. I need to know what's on Facebook. Do I come off of it? What do I do? And I thought, okay, I'll go an hour and a half and I'll be fine. I was so transfixed with what was going to happen. I couldn't stop. I had to finish the film. And then about 45 minutes out of the ending, I thought, oh no, this is not going to end on any solution, conclusion, nothing. It's going to be up to how I felt about it. And that thrilled me, because the end sequence is mesmerizing. It's mesmerizing.
Oh.
It's really, and I think you're 100% correct. I think that watching the amount of films that we do has tanned us. It has textured us in the way we look at things. Because I can't say this 100% because I was raised with 2001, and that's very atmospheric and ethereal and very metaphysical, and I dug on that. And the whole stuff with the apes in that film was very like, what the hell is going on in this movie? But for whatever reason, that film spoke to me. So I don't know. I don't know if I was in high school, I would even sit through a 2 hour and 45 minute film like this. But I'm glad that I can now, and I'm glad that it spoke to me. It really did speak to me. And the whole rest of the day after I finished watching it, I kept hearing weird things and seeing things differently in reality. And I was like, okay, man, this is really going way past suspension of disbelief. But that's just a compliment to the film that it affected me that deeply.
Yeah, I think that we've got to understand that Tarkovsky as a filmmaker he kind of came up in this time in the Soviet Union. So, I mean, he's obviously controlled, and he's working within a system that's very controlled. And he has to get all of his films approved by the Soviet Union. And he's working within a country that is inherently, that they are patently atheist, and he is Christian. So he's having to work in this kind of weird system where he's having to get things approved, but he's trying to inject his beliefs and his thoughts and get that in there underneath the radar in some ways. And there are a lot of reasons why this is his last film in the Soviet Union. But I think that is another obstacle. Like, filmmakers may not feel like they like obstacles, but what ends up happening is obstacles create better art. And that is definitely the case in this scenario, because he had a bunch of obstacles in this film. So just the fact that he's making a film that has these types of metaphysical things and deals with belief and deals with some sort of faith or some sort of intrinsic belief in something that he's having to move and weave within the Soviet system. And the other fact is that they started off just from the very beginning when they tried to shoot this film. They wanted to shoot it in the Middle East. And there was an earthquake in the place that they wanted to shoot it. And so they couldn't even shoot there. So they ended up shooting in Estonia, actually in the same place Christopher Nolan shot Tenet, in Tallinn, Estonia, which was part of the Soviet Union at the time. So they completely had to change where they were going to shoot it, which obviously changes a bunch of things. And then they shot a good chunk of the first half of the film, but they shot it on a fairly new type of film. It was this Kodak 5247 stock. And when they sent it to get processed at the Mosfilm processing area, they didn't really know how to deal with it, or they didn't ask anybody how to deal with it. And it just wiped out all of their film to the point where it was unusable. So it's essentially saying like, hey, all that work that you did, well, it's worthless. So they had to start completely over again. And not only did they have to reshoot the beginning of the film, that gave Tarkovsky time to back up and kind of change course away from where he was going with the film. It was based on a book called Roadside Picnic by a couple other Russians, Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. So he based it on that, and it has very similar kind of building blocks, but he kind of went a different way, especially towards the end of the film. But yeah, it allowed him to retool that, and I think it's actually really interesting, because I did read the basis for the book, and he takes it in a kind of a different direction. And so I'm kind of glad that he did that. But yeah, so there's all of these kind of like hurdles put in his place, and he's trying to figure out different ways to get over them. And so the story behind the film is really interesting. I think the film is actually more interesting than the story behind the film, but the fact that he had to go through all of that, everyone had to go through all of that to get this made. And also, could you imagine like a different room, like a different exterior to the room? The inside of that building is where they had the dunes, the kind of sand dunes, and like so just like ethereal and creepy, and just why are those dunes there? Like there's so many questions. It's like all of these things flip through your mind, and they sit in that. And that's where the writer has his soliloquy to the camera. That was bold. Like I realized about halfway through, I was like, oh, that's direct address. He's talking to the camera, which I did not expect in this kind of a film. But you brought up a fourth person in the zone. There is a scene where it's one of the scenes where they're walking through the zone. They have these nuts, and they tie fabric around the nuts, and they throw the nuts ahead, and then that indicates that it's safe for them to move forward where the nut has traveled before them. So they're traveling from nut to nut, and it cuts from them starting to walk to a shot of a dilapidated car that has doors that are ripped off of it. And then the camera dollies towards the car. And as the camera dollies towards the car, you kind of see some grass below the camera move. So you can assume that like we are a first person view of one of the characters, because the grass is moving and stuff. But as we get towards the car and closer to the car, and we actually go through the car, the open doors of the car, you start seeing other characters move into frame, and you see the first character, then you see the second character, and then you see the third person. Ultimately, you realize that we are actually the fourth person. There is a fourth entity in the zone. There's this other there that we're a part of. And so, yeah, and that's actually the same scene. As you move through that car, you see all of the anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns in the tanks that are all dilapidated. And that's when the Stalker talks to everybody about why violence is not an option in this zone, because they tried that and it didn't work. So every once in a while, they give you a little bit more information and it kind of hooks you in. Let's talk about the beginning. The credit sequence is something that we talk about this all the time, where it's like there's a lot of movies where they purposely will give the first sequence of the movie or the pre-credit sequence or the very beginning of the film tests the audience. Maybe not in 1979, but in 2021, that credit sequence tests the audience because it's essentially a locked off shot for 5 minutes, 4 minutes. And then we go straight from that to pretty much another locked off shot for another 5 minutes. So first 10 minutes of the film is very simple. And so if you're able to get through that first 10 minutes, hopefully you can hang in for the rest of it. And hopefully also you've realized that the whole film is in this sepia tone. What did you feel like when you fired this up and you were like, okay, well, what's going on here?
Well, I love the idea of the sepia tone because I like that whole old photograph looking thing. You know, you go to Busch Gardens and get your picture taken in Wild West world and it's in that sepia tone, and I really like that. But this is more of a golden hue to it. It is definitely sepia tone, but well, it becomes more vibrant later on, but it's definitely more golden than normal. Usually it's a more tannish brown, if you will.
Yeah, it's more like burnt. You're right. Sepia is more burnt.
But that would be the color I would describe it as. That would be the term I would use to describe it as. And as for the opening shot, it's so funny when the credits come up, I found myself trying to look around them, look underneath them, because there's characters doing stuff. And I noticed that it wasn't because I was reading the subtitles and they were in the way. The actual words for the credit sequence are in the middle of the shot. And so I was like, why are they making us struggle to figure, oh, there's got to be something going on behind this. So I got to pay attention to it. And then I realized maybe there isn't anything going on and I'm just forcing myself to believe something's behind it. Is that a clue to something happening? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe that's just trying to invoke a feeling. So I initially was in on this film taking me on a journey that I might not have been expecting. And I was all about it. Because sometimes when you're in a bad mood or you've had a long day or you're tired or you're hyper or you got other things to do, a film will distract you from that. But if the film doesn't distract you from that, it takes a lot of energy to focus on it. And I was having one of those days where I could have done 5 million other things instead of watching a movie. But I knew I had to get the movie in because I knew it was going to be thought-provoking. For some reason, I had this instinct that it was going to be challenging, maybe because of all the things that we've been watching. Now, this is a Russian filmmaker who I've heard so much about and subtitles. And I was like, okay, be prepared. So I think you're right. I think it does key you into how your disposition has to be during this film. And then I think you're 100% right about him taking his time in shots because there'll be something really interesting going on. And it's usually in an American film, but not 100%. But there'll be something going on and the director will cut away. And you're like, no. I always think of that one scene in Walk the Line with Reese Witherspoon where she's having her little breakdown. It's just a second or two short. Like he cuts it. And I understand why he did. And in a way, I like that. That wasn't self-indulging or self-indulgent. But I do need to just like pause it and live in that moment she lives in and Walk the Line. And in this, you don't have to worry about it at all. Because as that camera is locked down in that bedroom shot, you're like, oh, wait, I can see the window. Is that water on the floor? Why are there puddles of water on the floor? But you have time to contemplate it. It never does anything other than give you time. It gives you time to see the textures in the wall. And I think that's the sepia tone helps with that. And it's very vibrant.
Well, it's high contrast, the key too. It's sepia tone, but then also like the darks are really dark and the whites are really white or brights are really bright. So yeah.
I thought to myself a couple of things in the opening sequence, especially when he finally wakes up. I thought the child's important. Pay attention to the child. What's happening with this child? Why hasn't she moved? That did cross my mind. And I was like, is that his wife or is that his daughter? What's going on here? And then when he gets up, something happens to me where I start to feel grateful that I was raised in the environment and country that I was raised in, because that might be everybody's normal environment in this film. That might be the way that it is for them, you know, dripping water everywhere and wet floors, and then they have to light that fire to get everything going for breakfast. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I've never had to do any of that stuff. You know, I had like a selfish feeling where I was like, okay. But then I thought, well, what does it say about them that they have to? Because at this point, you don't know anything. Are they setting it up for this character to like start to do something illegal to get out of the circumstances that he's in? But I knew he wanted out of the circumstances he was in just by all of those opening shots. Not necessarily in the bar or whatever that place is. Is it a bar? What is it? I mean, I guess it's a bar, right? But it has one table stand. There's nowhere else to sit.
Well, the bar.
There was no seats at the bar. Were there? No, there weren't. I don't think there were. And there was weird steam coming out of what would be the taps. And I was like, what's going on there? Like, is that something I'm not familiar with from a different country? But it's all very intriguing. And I do want to jump on what you were saying. I don't think that you can have a conversation about this film and be linear with the conversation. I don't think you can go from the first 10 minutes to the second hour to the last 45. I don't think you can do that because you have to make reference to things in the future of this film that you were feeling in the beginning of the film. Because when those three are walking, after they get off the train tracks and they're walking through the zone, something went through my head and I don't know why, but it did. I went, is this supposed to be some kind of like allegory about the three guys on the cross? Christ and the two guys who were crucified at the same time Christ was. And I was like, why did that just go through my head? And I was like, is this their afterlife? And Christ is showing them through their afterlife. And then, because then the water came into place and I was like, is the water the river Styx? I was like, is this what's happening in this film? And I thought, where the hell did that thought come from? But then, that's why I said spoilers up front. Then you get to the outside of the room and all of a sudden this crown of thorns appears.
Yep.
And the one character, and I was like, I knew it had something to do with it. Yeah, if the Stalker character had put it on, I was like, I'm right. I understand art. Because the religious undertones in this film are very subtle. They're not, it's all in conversations more than it is in symbols. But I could feel it and I could sense it and I knew it was there. And then all of a sudden, it literally was there. And I was like, okay, now that I'm right, finger quotes, I have no idea what that means. Like, what does that mean? I don't know why he's putting on the crown of thorns, that kind of stuff. So back to your original question. Yes, I think that it's smart to open this film the way that he does, because you're right. It sets the pace for what you're about ready to experience. And you know that this is not going to be something that is explained all the way through the film. You're going to have to figure out how you feel about it and fill in the gaps, if you will, for lack of a better term. Yeah. I don't think there's any gaps. I just think that things are not spoon-fed in this movie. So you have to, it's an interesting thing to turn off your logical side of your mind and just let the art side take it in. But then there's some kind of analytical need to figure it out for me. And so I was like, okay, so talking about the nuts, and it's so funny because when you're talking about it, it sounds like we're talking about nuts that you eat, but it's not. It's like bolts and nuts. Yeah. Because I thought to myself, what was fascinating / frustrating is that you never see those strands of material that go flying across the field so they can see which way they can walk. You never see what happens if they can't walk that way. Like, he only throws it where they can walk. And then there's a couple of times where he builds some tension with those things. And then later on in the film, he throws them and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Something's going to explode. Or are they going to come flying back to him? What is this? But it never does happen. So you have to kind of fill in the gaps with your own imagination of what would happen. And then brilliantly, he allows that guy, the writer, to walk up to the building, and there's another voice that comes from somewhere. It could be a reflection of something that the other two say and it's bounced back, or it could be a reflection of something that was there, or it could be somebody there. You're never sure, but he pretty much says, don't go this way. Nope, stop. And the guy goes,
well, that's the thing, is Stalker primes him for that. Like, Stalker's like, hey, you don't want to go there. If you do decide to move forward without throwing the trial nut, then you're risking your life. There's no way to know what's going to happen. If you hear anything, if you feel anything, then definitely turn back because it's bad news. And so the writer is essentially primed at that point, even though he's like defiant and he's like, I don't care what you guys say. It's right there. I'm just going to walk right up to it. Then if not consciously, subconsciously, his senses are heightened for some sort of interaction, some sort of metaphysical interaction that could potentially happen. And that's what he felt. And so at that point, there's kind of a game going on that I'm going through in the film as I'm like, okay, so you're right, never in the film through at least the first part, because it's kind of divided into part 1 and part 2. Through the first part, there's never a time when we see him throwing a nut and it just like vanishes into thin air, or it gets incinerated, or there's a laser that comes down.
It bounces back.
Yeah, or it bounces.
Yeah. Or it disappears. Yeah.
Yeah, we never get to see the alternate option or the alternate potential for this. So is it just literally something that it's just a game that the Stalker is playing and a procedure that he's going through to build up some kind of mythology that he's creating to generate desire and thought moving forward? But I don't think that that's the case. But we don't know that at the time. In some ways, Tarkovsky's toying with us because he's not giving us a definitive, like, there's definitely some sort of supernatural interaction in this zone or in this area. So all we've seen so far is dilapidated tanks and messed up cars and poles that are torn down, and nobody lives here anymore. So as an audience, you're kind of like coming at it and being like, what is preventing people from going there? Now there are discussions, at least, talking about stalkers and the detrimental effects that going into the zone has on stalkers. Earlier on in the film is that any children that they have will be mutated, and so that's kind of laced in there early on. So that's, once again, priming us as the audience for what potentially could happen in the future. But there's all these little breadcrumbs that are left, and then the first half of the film is kind of like laying them down, and the second half of the film is fulfilling some of those things, or at least extending some of those things. I never felt like I was getting toyed with too much, but I did feel like there's potential off ramps for each of these things that are being brought up. It's like this thing could totally be just made up. And throughout the film, even in the kind of like pre-room, the ante-room, for lack of a better term, he still kind of plays with those options. So yeah, I did want to go back to, before we actually get into the zone, the action sequence of the film, for lack of a better word, where they get into that like Land Rover and they're just kind of like all over the place. Yeah. I mean, that actually was something that I was not expecting. I was not expecting that kind of tension in a film like this, but there was true time-based tension and trying to get away from those guys. Did you notice the guy had a helmet on that had an AT on it, and the director's name is Andrei Tarkovsky? So it kind of looks like the Appalachian Trail AT logo, right? But still, I thought that was interesting. And then also the guard station has an AT on it too, and you see that cigarettes. There's a cigarette packet later on in the film that has the AT on it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a mark of the government, but then also at the same time, it's still a mark of Tarkovsky too, I think, maybe. But yeah, so it seems like he's got this very specific procedure of how to go from point A to point B to point C to point D, and you have to do it in this particular time frame, and it has to be a very specific to make it past the guards in a certain way to get across the threshold into the zone. I thought that was kind of cool, that it's very Ocean's 11, we got to do this exactly in this way. And so that was actually more exciting than I'd expected. But then he really tones it down once they get onto that little trolley cart thing, the gas-powered trolley cart, and then they just kind of like head out. I was amazed at how long he spent on that trolley cart, and also the fact that he didn't actually show any kind of like transitioning landscapes. He focused just on the characters. He was in a close-up of each of the writer, the professor, and the stalker.
For a long time.
Yeah.
For a really uncomfortably long time, in the best sense.
Yep.
And that goes back to what you were talking about, being the fourth person in the film, being the audience, being the fourth person in the film, because I was perplexed by that. I was like, what is he saying to us by shooting these guys so close up? And some of them had their head turned away from the camera while they're in full frame. And then I think it's the writer that he has that kind of turns to the left and to the right, and you see him up close for a long period of time. Yeah. And I'm thinking now, based on the theory of maybe we're the fourth person in the film, also kind of answers some other questions later on in the film, with where they focus during that one monologue. And then there's that scene where Stalker's off camera and talking, and the two characters, the writer and the professor, are in the frame, but they're kind of, the professor's looking off to his side and the writer is looking towards the camera, but they're focused on Stalker outside of frame. And then there's two different moments when the writer looks right directly in the camera,
Yep.
and then Stalker says something and he looks back at Stalker, and then the professor looks at the camera and then looks away again. And I was like, wait, and I was like, do I have to rewind that? Did they just look at the camera? Because it jars you because you're not used to it. Don't look at the camera, they tell you all the time.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, don't look directly in the camera. And I'm sure with TV, that's probably not as big of an issue because, reporters look into the camera. But, doing all the extra work that I did, that's the thing that they reiterate 1,000 times during the day. Don't look at the camera. If you think you're going to look at the camera, look down at the ground. Look up at the sky. Don't look at the camera. And if you can't handle focused on whatever we want you focused on, get out of the shot. And they don't hold spar on that kind of stuff. They just like, get out. So then they do it a second and third time. And I went, no, they are looking at the camera. What are they telling us by them looking at the camera? And then, of course, not to skip too far in the future, it happens again with the monologue, and then it happens again with her monologue at the end of the film. And I'm thinking, how is he getting away with this? Because traditionally, when you shoot, and you said soliloquies are to the audience. When the Shakespeare speaks in monologues, it's usually to the audience, which is really hard to do as an actor, by the way. It's really nerve-wracking. And I've had to do it in the last two plays that I've been in, and it's just not comfortable, but you deal with what you got to deal with. So when they do that in a movie, it's usually like a gag or like a trick. And it's usually like Ferris Bueller, where it's like breaking the fourth wall on purpose, and that becomes the shtick. But in this, it's not. It's some kind of clue or indication about something. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not your traditional fourth wall breaking scenario. Then when you said that thing about being maybe the fourth person in the film and the grass moving, I thought, well, maybe he's showing you what your position in that gas cart would be by being so close to the other three. And if Stalker was speaking and you were supposed to be part of the interaction, they would look at you for your reaction because they look at each other for their reactions to whatever's happening. So I thought, okay, when you said that, I was like, well, maybe that's what sews that up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's correct, but it definitely, it rang true. When you said it, I was like, ding, that bell is ringing. That makes sense to me. And if that's the reason why, that is freaking brilliant. Because I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before in a movie.
Yeah.
I can't think of it.
Yeah. I think that scene it's kind of hypnotic because, like you said, it's very simple composition. It's a close up. And really the thing that's energizing that scene is the sound effects and the kakung, kakung, kakung. I mean, it is very hypnotic to the point where you just get settled in. And you're just kind of like feeling this just very steady feeling of we're moving forward. And to the point where there's a hard cut to color into the landscape as you're moving into the zone. And I didn't actually clock it until it was probably, 10 seconds in to that shot. I had been lulled, but not in a bad way, lulled in a good way into this feeling of progress moving forward. And we were just so used to being in this high contrast area and feeling in the film that when it cuts to color, it took me a second to process that, oh, it's in color now. Like we're in a different place. This is markedly different. And we're not looking at a close-up of these guys. We're looking at this landscape of, and it's not even like a wide shot. It's like a medium shot of landscape. And it's not even like mountains and stuff. It's poles and things like that. But still, it's a different feeling and it eases you into it. I don't know. It was really cool. I didn't realize it should be like a bang, but it wasn't.
No, he breaks all the rules when it comes to that.
Yeah.
He breaks all the rules because he switches back and forth eventually later on in very short periods
That's
of time.
true.
And then he does it at
For
the
a
end of the
reason.
film too.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely for a reason, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Because once again, studying art history, I enjoyed being told why something was considered art. Not why I should feel it's art, but why it's considered after this length of time art. And we've talked about this, about the fertility symbols. Venus of Willendorf, I think it's called. It's a big kind of, well, it's not big, it's actually small, but it's kind of this voluptuous, full-figured woman figure, but it doesn't have traditional features on it. And I would thought it looked like a teddy bear. I wouldn't have known anything about it, but they actually explained in art history class of why it was considered a classic piece of art because of the fertility symbols and all this stuff, and the reason why it was about eating well and being able to go on, and how we've kind of gotten away from the feminine side of running our society, but that was revered back in those days. And so don't quote me on any of that stuff. I barely remember it, but that's something like that. But I would have never looked at it that way. And actually, it has shown up in other things. If you've ever seen The Witches of Eastwick, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
Long time ago,
but
yeah.
remember Cher is a sculptor, and she's sculpting these statues that she gives to the local tourist place. And you find out that Jack Nicholson one day goes in and buys all of them. And then he tells her, you need to go bigger. You need to be grand. It needs to be huge. And then you see her sculpting a very large form of what she sculpted. It's the Venus of Willendorf figure. So it has continued on in our society and in our history, and there's a reason behind it. So I'm not asking anybody to tell me I should have felt this way during Stalker, but I would like to know this symbol means what to who, when, and where, and maybe that will solidify my feeling about what I felt during the movie. Not that it's necessary. I was transfixed by this film regardless of the knowledge of anything. And then the fact that he breaks that rule about going from, Dorothy has to go through a door in order for the color to happen in Oz. That's what we were raised on. There has to be a reason. There has to be a reason for the tonal shift of going to color. Not here. Literally is one shot to the next shot, and you just accept it for what it is. And I think it's because the cinematography is so beautiful, and it has that same kind of tone about it that the sepia color has. When they go to color, it has the same feeling. It's kind of dull but sharp at the same time. And so I don't think it's as jarring to us as it could possibly be because it's so beautiful. And I also think at that point, you're relieved that you know that things are supposed to be green, not burnt red, orange color, So I think on some psychological level, you're like, okay. And it's also interesting to me that the zone is in color and his life is in sepia. So does that mean that one is better than the other? Like it's better to be in the zone? Like it just, your mind just starts going.
Yeah, I think for Stalker, that's definitely the case because it seems like he feels more at home in the zone, even though his family is not in the zone, because right when they get in the zone and they stop the cart and they all get out, he's like, give me a second, guys. He goes down and he just lays in the grass and just rolls around. And it's like, you can tell that that's where he feels most at home. And I'm sure he's conflicted because of that too, because like I said, his family's not in the zone, but that is what keeps calling him back. It's obviously he makes money on it, but then at the same time, this is where he feels more at home. And it's where he feels like he belongs potentially. And where he feels like he is more of an expert or more useful potentially. Because you could tell that, especially at the beginning of the film, he just seems like super down in the dumps. But there is that area, that period of time where it does go back into sepia, where they're kind of laying in the aqueduct. And I think that's
water.
Yeah, I think that's them not being in the zone. That's them in some sort of hallucinatory state. They're being affected in some way, mentally affected in some way. And that's how it manifests is in that. And then there's all the representations of that kind of amazing overhead dolly shot. It kind of starts in one place in that aqueduct. It's very shallow water, and you kind of move through and you see some fish and you see a couple other things and you see syringes. But as it moves, it's, I don't know, it'd be like a vertical comic book strip. Like you're reading panel to panel to panel, except it's just one big long panel, and instead of reading left to right, you're reading bottom to top, and the camera is revealing new information as the camera moves and moves and moves, where you would know that if you just zoomed out, you could see all of that stuff and you could evaluate all that stuff. But it's using spatial relationship as a temporal storytelling device. Instead of looking at it in a big wide shot, you're seeing it in kind of close up, and it's telling a story based on what you see when and how you react to those different things. And it ends up on his hand, a close up of his hand, and he's laying there, and then it kind of widens out a little bit where he's kind of laying in a little landing thing in the middle of the aqueduct, and you see the dog come running up to him and kind of sit down right by him. So I don't really have a good feeling or a good representation of what the dog is. I do know that that dog was just there in Tallinn and they were able to use it, which I thought was really cool. Like I thought it was like a dog that was trained to do particular things and be there, but it was just kind of this intuitive dog that was there and they were able to get some amazing shots with it, and it was able to interact with people and they were able to work around it and all that stuff. But yeah, I thought that was kind of amazing actually, and a little bit spooky. This dog, they're just able to
A little
use this dog. So yeah, but
well, you know what ran through my head, and I know this. I know that I am of a literal mind sometimes. Even though I have an artist heart, I have a literal soul sometimes. So I have to know point A equals B equals C, and now it's D. I have to know 1 + 1 = 2. My mind can't take it in sometimes if it's too abstract. But for whatever reason, when I saw the dog, all I kept thinking is that's God spelled backwards. I don't know if that meant anything, but that's what ran through my head. And it ran through my head before I realized the thing about the religion or Christ, before I saw anything to validate that. Okay, so let's take in just for a split second. I like the description about how that was like a comic book panel. Instead of it was one panel, 2 panels, it was one continuous panel. I like that. But I was perplexed and also did not spend a lot of time in my mind on it. But I thought, what is the deal with the syringes? And why are they 1940s syringes?
Did you notice the syringes at the beginning of the film in the container?
Yes,
the tin?
I did. And so I was like, is this some kind of, this is what people wished for when they went into the room? When I realized when he tells you what the room is about, what is this? Because you see a gun up close in that shot, but then you see a gun later on that belongs to the writer that he shoves down, he pushes down into the water later on. And I thought, is this all like one of those things where is this about predestination? Is this about there is no fate? Everything is predetermined? What is this? I didn't give it much thought past the point of, well, some things you just have to let flow over you. And some things you can analyze and maybe put your finger on it. And then I thought, well, how is this making me feel? And it kept making me feel like I needed to strip away all of the things in life that were troublesome to some people, brought pleasure to other people, could bring horror to some people, guns and killing and all that other stuff. But, shooting and hunting is part of my upbringing. Yeah. So, it could be a good thing.
Same thing with a syringe. A syringe is only a vessel. A syringe could be something that gives life-saving medication. It can also be...
It is now.
Yeah, it can also be something that chains someone to an addiction. So if the syringe itself is not the statement, it's what's inside the syringe. So there's all kinds of different evaluations for that. But I think the fact that there's a syringe at the beginning of the film, that particular syringe in the cases, I'm guessing it has something to do with their kid, some sort of medication potentially. I don't think it would, but I don't know. It's also just waste too. It can be considered waste.
Well, there's money in there too.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And then there's all these weird things that I thought were one thing, but then when I was looking very closely, I was like, I don't know what that is. It's a bracket to something. Is it a car part? What is that? And I just think sometimes I have to let those things go and just whatever my initial feeling is what it's meant to be, and then just move on, because you can interpret it 1,000 different ways if you wanted to.
Did you also notice the tile that was underneath all of it is the same tile that's in the room?
Yes, I did.
So where are we looking? Like it's that the fact that that's in the sepia tone, it kind of takes us out of the geography of the zone. So even though we've got the building that the room is in, and we've got the 3 main characters, and we've got the camera, and we've got all the land in between them, and we've got the waterfall, and we've got the little kind of like arched opening and all that stuff. When we're in the sepia world, that probably doesn't really mean much. I don't think we can say like this is the exact location of where they laid down, because Tarkovsky did a lot with framing of shots that prevented us as an audience from knowing what's outside of the shot, because the first time we see them kind of come out of this kind of like archway. Well, it's actually when they're just all sitting there and they're getting all together. And he's like, all right, guys, we're going to have to go through a few particular scenarios. And then you see them cut into a different portion of the zone. And then later on, when they're like, the professor has to go back and get his rucksack, so we got to leave him because you can't go back. And he decided he was going to go back. So too bad for him. We're not going to wait for him, and there's no way he's going to be able to meet us where we're at because that's not how the zone works. So they move forward, they go into the waterfall kind of area and they walk in, and then they end up coming back out where they were earlier, and that's where the professor is with his rucksack. But what we didn't realize is that that waterfall is directly adjacent to the area where the guy with the rucksack is, because there is a dolly shot that connects those two later on in the film. So it's like, and it's not the last time that he does this in this film, where it's because he has so few shots, the determination of where the camera is located means so much in this film, because we're not in a scenario where you're in a room and there's a dialogue scene and there's 6 different camera setups. One's an over the shoulder on person A, one's an over the shoulder on person B, one's a wide shot, one's an over the head. We don't get any of that. There's certain locations where there's 2 camera shots or 1 camera shot, where that's all we get in that location. So our sense of geography in that location is minimized. All we see is what's in the frame. We don't know what's to the left, to the right, behind us. We don't know any of that. So when he does decide to reveal newer portions of the location, of the geography, it means a lot more. So the most important example of that is when, close to the end of the film, when the camera is actually in the room, and we have all of this build up to them in the dunes and in the anteroom and in all that stuff. And then Tarkovsky decides to, at this point, nobody's going into the room, which we haven't even gotten into that yet. That's a whole nother thing. But at this point, nobody's going into the room, but the camera is in the room and it's looking at those guys. And then, it zooms out. You're right. So we don't even know, like, we kind of can tell, like, oh, wait, the guys are sitting 90 degrees rotated from how they were just sitting. Oh, wait, no, this is a different camera shot. And as we zoom out, we see the tiles. We see that there's water in there. We see that, like, okay, maybe, there's a little rock area in between that kind of looks like the writer when he almost fell into the room. And then you realize you're in the room. And then you get the rain scene, which actually that kind of took me out of it a little bit. That's the only like little thing that I've got, because you could tell that they were using rain towers. Like, I don't know if you've probably seen rain towers.
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah.
Where it's literally just tubes with holes in them, and you put water through them and it sprays out in a grid pattern. And you can really tell that it's a grid pattern. You can really tell that, where all the tubes were and all that stuff.
Okay, so I actually think that was on purpose.
Really?
I actually think because the pattern on the floor, there was something in the floor that created a pattern. It wasn't just the rain tubes. The rain tubes stopped, and I actually think they moved in. They were like maybe on some kind of like electronic thing that moved them across, because the water did start. And I thought, well, that's interesting. The water started, the rain started, but the rain started to move closer to the center of the room and then over to the side of the room and sort of only filled up half of the room. Yeah. But if you look at water underneath, when the rain tubes moved away and they were kind of dripping here and there's a pattern on the floor that's coming up from the floor. Huh. I swear to unless I'm starting to see things. And it's very possible I'm starting to see things that weren't there, because this film makes you hypersensitive to stuff because you're paying attention to things that are not normal sounds. The normal bings and whistles of life are not in existence. And that brings me to something that it reminded me of immediately. And I thought, well, that for me is a compliment. It reminded me of Annihilation. Yeah. The kind of, Annihilation reminds me of this now. So, because this came first. But the bings and whistles of normal sounds inside the zone of Annihilation, or the bubble, or whatever, the glimmer, right?
It's a shimmer.
Is that what it is?
It's the shimmer?
Yeah. They don't define it like that in the book. They don't call it anything. They also don't have character names in the book either, which I thought was interesting. Anyway, the shimmer, I think you're right. Nothing is normal in that area. Things are different. Things are growing differently. Things are mutated differently. And the bings and whistles of life are different. So you might be hearing something, and it might be an echo of something else. So when you're inside the zone, the way that your footsteps fall, and did you notice that even when they were walking in the tunnel, it sounded like they were walking on broken glass. Yeah. And there's
like a lot of echo glass on the floor and delay and all that. Yeah. There's a lot of that.
Yeah. And there's no glass in that tunnel. they're not walking on glass. They're not crunching on glass. I
Okay.
swear. And if they are, I don't know what I'm seeing. But I sometimes see things that aren't in films. I think my mind just I don't know.
How was that scene, that tunnel scene? Because it seems like such a, like, we're so used to that scene being Freddy Krueger jumps out or whatever. And I think the payoff was that there was no payoff, but it still created in me the same tension that a Nightmare on Elm Street movie would, or whatever.
Well, I thought to myself, Andy Muschietti might be a little bit upset if he watches Stalker anytime soon, because that tunnel is what it was about. And I think he did well in those two movies. I like It 1 and 2. I do like those movies. I just was re-watching part 2 the other night, and it's creepy, and I think he does the book justice. But if you compare it, if you want to do that, which I don't, but if you did, one is obviously a natural phenomenon in the tunnel in Stalker, and one is a production designed tunnel in It. And maybe it's based on real stuff in It, but it looks like it was designed and built to look that way. This in Stalker, that tunnel looks like, because there's no way that's done by a production team. That was really a tunnel like that,
it's a
right?
hydroelectric power plant, and it wasn't in use. Yeah, so it was one of the tubes that weren't in use in the hydroelectric power plant.
So all of those slimy things coming down from the ceiling were all natural phenomenons.
Well, I
and you
don't know
can
about
tell.
that, but yeah, I mean the lighting and stuff. Yeah, it's
well. Then they did well, because if that's not natural, I don't. It creeped me out on so many levels. Like, I could not have just walked straight through that tunnel. I would have had to have like gone under and over and to the side. I could not have come near those things hanging. I think that you might be partially right about the production value, because there's like a foam moss on some of the walls that obviously is intentional. And then there's a shot when they're looking at the room from the side. The camera view is from the side, and there are like, I don't even know what it is. It's almost like there was like shelving or something on the wall, and the brackets or the wood that was holding up the cabinet on the side of the wall was ripped out in the middle of it, and then ripped out closer to the top. So you get 3 strips of this old wood, and crawling through that is this moss thing that I thought was just natural. But then I realized after you see the end of the movie with all of the little dandelion things flying around, well, those are floating all over the room in the last couple shots. In the last 2 major shots of this film, over him on the bed, and it creates that same kind of mossy feeling that room had on its wall. Why? I have no idea. But I would like to do a deep dive into the production design of this film. I would like to know what was real, what was emphasized from realness, or what was completely built for this film, because I can't tell the difference. Now, obviously, when you do that one shot going through the car, there's a body there and a machine gun. That reminded me of Annihilation 2. And then at the end, in the side room, not the room with the telephone, which is a whole nother podcast. It's a whole nother podcast. It's a whole nother podcast. But in the other smaller room that you don't really focus on until later on, there's a lady or somebody laying there with like an olive branch coming out of her, and the door's opening and
yes. I know. And the dog's like holding guard there, and the door's opening and closing. Yeah.
Freaked me out. I thought, okay, I'm really, okay. I gave up those kind of drugs years ago. I'm like, am I having some kind of weird flashback? Because I know I saw that. And you saw the guy with the machine gun, right?
In the car, yes. As you go through the car, okay. No. I saw that stuff, but then I was mainly focusing on the door rhythmically opening and closing, and the dog kind of like essentially like being on guard. Like, I didn't know if that was like the potential real room, or if there was like something else going. There's just something else going on. There's just this feeling of an other.
I think that woman, and I'm assuming it's a woman because they had long red hair, but it could be a male, I don't know. And you see the skeleton of her hand in that shot, and then like a sprig of something is growing out of it. I thought it was an olive branch. Something about the olive tree, who knows, religious symbolism. I think she's a woman who didn't have a nut and didn't know where to go, and that's where she ended up, because the room didn't want her to go down that place, and then she went the wrong way. So the room, just like the scene about don't go in there, the zone is telling you where to go.
Where do you fall on the guy who told him all this is Porcupine, and the guy that was his mentor. And so Porcupine decided to one day go into the room, assuming that one day he decided to go into the room. And this is kind of when Stalker reveals to the guys, this is right on the precipice of the room that he reveals to the guys that your deepest desire will be fulfilled. And the reason why the writer doesn't go in there is because he's afraid of what his deepest desire is. And the reason why the professor doesn't blow it up is because, well, I don't know why the professor doesn't blow it up specifically, but he's kind of beguiled to the point where he disables the bomb and just throws like half of it, the keypad half of it into the room, and he's just like done with it. But he takes the radioactive part out of it, or the kind of like explosive part out of it. But where do you fall on the Porcupine is the person who told the Stalker about it? Porcupine killed himself after he had gone into the room after a couple days. There's a potential that this is all made up. That the mythology of the zone, the mythology of the supernatural element of the zone is all made up by Porcupine or by other people. They keep people out of there. Now, this does presage Chernobyl, because in fact, in the Soviet Union, they ended up calling that area around Chernobyl the zone. I don't know if it was a reference to Stalker, right, or if it was just an easy thing to call it. And the zone is also a representation of the Gulag from the Soviet Union in the past and throughout that time of suffering and forced labor camps and just a place that you don't want to be. So I guess I'm trying to nail down the relationship to the supernatural element of it and relating that to the particular portion of the scene where he says the one thing that you have to have when you go into the room is you have to believe. And I think that that's, especially coming from a writer-director who is Christian, like that belief in a country that is telling him, that is forcing him to tamp down that belief or to not profess what he believes. Is that a representation of faith? The thing that is keeping him coming back, the thing that is keeping him motivated is actually his faith, and not necessarily some sort of alien that's going to kill him if he doesn't throw a nut. It's his faith in that, even if it doesn't come to fruition, even if all the bad things don't happen. But there's a literal reading of this, and then there's a kind of a more heady reading of it. But I don't know. I'm working through it, I guess.
Okay. Well, how could you not? I mean, how could you, if you came out of this film, not you, anybody, comes out of this film and completely understands it, I would be a little scared of that person, because they're vibrating on a different zone than I think is reality right now. You know, their temperature is different than mine. So I'm not so sure I would want to know that person. And I also don't want to know exactly what everything means anyway, because I want to take what I take from it. But I understand, because I can sense a little bit of frustration in you trying to figure it out. And I get that. I feel that too. So let's work backwards. It has to be something metaphysical. It has to be something spoke to the writer. Don't go in there. You literally hear somebody go, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, got it. Something they can sense and feel it. And he says somewhere can't you feel it? Don't you feel it? You can feel it. The room it's right over there. Don't you feel it? He talks about that. So I think the men do feel it, and they're in denial about it, because when they come out of that cave that you were talking about and that tunnel, and you're right, that waterfall shot, and then you realize the guy's sitting there with his knapsack or rucksack or whatever they call it. There's a nut hanging from the thing right there. Nobody knows where that came from, and they don't pay too much attention to it. And why the hell is a phone ringing in another room close to the room? I mean,
there can't be power. All the phone lines and the telegraph lines are down.
And also, where's the phone at? Phone is not there when you first go into that little room.
It was on the floor.
I don't think so. Then how did it get moved to the outside of the room when it rings again, when they don't answer it? That phone gets moved to where they step down into the water to sit right in front of the room. On that edge right there, there's the phone that rings later on.
Because I know the phone rings, he picks it up and says wrong number, hangs it up, and then the professor calls. The professor ends up initiating a call. He calls his the guy that he hates, and he's like, haha, I've done it. I found the bomb that you guys said you were hiding or whatever, and he kind of gets back at that guy or whatever.
That phone moves, and if they move it, I didn't see it, but it's there because it rings and nobody answers it closer to the end. Okay, so I do think it's about faith, and I do think it's about something metaphysical. I do think it's something about spirituality, and there's something in there. There is a force in there that we can't have an explanation of. Maybe we can't until we actually go in the room and see it. Okay, just like in Annihilation, I'm starting to really realize now. And Alex Garland, I'm starting to think
is the writer. So
we liked him on Twitter. And so he posts some really wicked cool stuff. He'll just post something about a hummingbird. He's cool. That guy's cool. He's doing it right on Twitter, in my opinion. Some of the things I don't understand, but it's pretty cool. Anyway, so how did Porcupine die? Okay. Then why is Stalker wearing a bandage around his neck?
Interesting.
Did you notice Stalker was wearing a bandage? Yes, but it's not prominent in the beginning. It's there, but it almost looks like part of his shirt. Because I registered it too, and I thought, well, that's a weird looking shirt, but maybe they had to like sew something to it. And then eventually it becomes much more visible. And then over him moving throughout the entire film, it kind of scrunches up like bandages do. So why is he wearing a bandage? It's never explained. It's never talked about. Is he telling his own story? Did he go into the room and his wish was to bring people here? That's why he keeps coming back and forth and back and forth. What was his wish?
Or was his wish to have a child?
Exactly. Or a family, or some way to support this family. And this is, be careful what you wish for, because you're right. That's what scares those two guys. Your deepest desire is fulfilled. And so, of course, you start, well, what is my deepest desire?
Exactly.
And then you start to think, well, wait a second. Am I aware of my deepest desire? Because is that subconscious, or is that in my frame of think? Like, can I figure out what my deepest desire is? I know what flashed through my head when I thought to myself, what would I go in and wish for? I know what went through my head. I'm not going to tell you.
But it doesn't matter what you would wish for. It matters what your deepest desire, what you would wish for is your conscious wish. And what your deepest desire is your subconscious wish.
And what whispered in my head has to be my subconscious wish, because I didn't think about it. It just came. It just flashed through my head. And it's nothing bad. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it sounds really egotistical, so I'm not going to say it.
So I think at that point, after the rain tower situation that we go through, then we magically end up back at the bar. And then that's when we see his wife, and his daughter's outside, his wife comes in, and then we get to see their interaction. And they brought the dog back. And I think the key, I was watching some of the like special features, because Criterion has some amazing special features on this film. But one of the special features was kind of like a video essay from this critic. And he was talking about how the dog is kind of like their proof of journey, where at the beginning of the day at the bar, they didn't have a dog. And at the end of the day at the bar, they did have a dog. Because as far as the wife's concerned, they could have just as easily sat at the bar and drank all day, and she wouldn't have known the difference. They have a dog.
Right,
it's like,
because
whoa,
she
where'd you
just
get this
sees
dog from? So it's like, yes, we did actually go somewhere. We did actually do something. And even though both of these men who paid to go to the zone are, I'm sure, profoundly changed, nobody's going to know that just by looking at them necessarily. But the dog is kind of like somewhat of a marker, I guess. So they end up having to keep the dog. And then we get to see the first instance of color outside of the zone. And it's the shot of Stalker's daughter on Stalker's shoulders as they're walking towards the river or something. So yeah, that to me it's another one of those revelations where you're like, okay, so this is kind of like a portion of the zone outside of the zone. That's what I pulled from it, is that when we see her in color, it's like this is a manifestation of the power of the zone outside of the zone. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then we get the whole scene between the husband and the wife, and the husband just completely just kind of shuts down. He's super wiped out. And that's where you were talking about the dandelions and all that stuff. And then we transition directly into the direct address from the wife. So what do you think about that one?
First of all, when he lays in the bed, he talks about belief, and all they have to do is believe. Why doesn't anybody believe? Why doesn't anybody trust me is basically what he's saying. I'm taking them to the promised land and they don't want to walk through. So that's very biblical, because there are tons of prophets throughout the Bible, Moses being one, going into the promised land where they didn't listen to him, and they built the golden calf, and next thing you know, according to Mel Brooks, there was 15 commandments, and he breaks one.
He's like,
he goes, 10 commandments. There are 10 as he breaks one of the tablets.
Well, Moses didn't go into the promised land either, because he struck a rock and water came out of it. And he's like, oh yeah, I totally did that. Whoops.
I thought he didn't go into the promised land because he got mad at them, and
it's because he struck. I mean, obviously you can cross-reference this and check it, but I believe it's because he struck a rock and didn't give glory to God.
When did he strike a rock and not give glory to God after?
Really, really thirsty, and he was like, "Okay, here you go," and he struck a rock and water came out, and he didn't give glory to God, and God was like, "Yeah, you can't go into the promised land."
Well, what's Moses' problem? Because you part the Red Sea, God did that. You thank him for that. He sends up a tower of fire and burns a bush and creates tablets in a mountain, and you thank God for that. Why would you not thank God for water coming from a
Well,
rock.
because he was starting to
what's wrong
feel
with
himself.
Moses?
He was starting to get a big head.
I thought that, well, actually, that's a reoccurring theme in the Bible that they leave out a lot in interpretations, where prophets are saying stuff and people don't listen. And then something comes to fruition and everybody's like, what? We got to run from locusts? And the prophet's going, I told you, put the blood over top of your door, you dumbass. And it happens over and over and over again. And so I kind of was proud of myself at the end of the film where I realized that my interpretation, that it did have something biblically or biblical in nature, that it had something to do with spirituality and it had something to do with Christ and belief and that kind of stuff, because the crown of thorns is a symbol of Christ. It's nothing else. There cannot be any interpretation of it. It didn't happen anywhere else except for Mount Calvary, or whenever they put it on during the scourging at the pillar. So I was kind of proud. I was like, okay, so I got some of this. But what I wasn't expecting is the explanation in the narrative that she talks about later on. I wasn't expecting that, because all of a sudden it became something about something bigger in nature. Then it became something about something very personal to her, and how she's basically, my interpretation was that, this guy is bleeding for these people and they're not paying attention to him. How much more can they put up with in their life? Basically, I don't know exactly what her speech was about, but to me, I don't even 100% remember what she was talking about, because I didn't have time to reflect on it.
She did essentially say that, like, my family told me that this was going to be kind of like my lot in life. If I do go, he's a stalker. If I do have a kid, there's going to, essentially, like, my kid's going to be messed up. And she said, but it didn't matter because I wanted to do it anyway. Like, I felt like this was the right thing to do anyway.
Right.
And so the other thing that I got more out of, actually, in all of that shot, is that when you see, this is the framing thing. Oh my gosh, it's so good. So that first shot that you see where he is waking up, and it's just that big wide shot of their whole bedroom, and then he wakes up and he gets up and moves out, and then you even see him kind of like leave the room, and he comes in the foreground, which is really cool. And then you can tell he's in the kitchen and all that stuff. Well, when we see him, I think he's like taking off his clothes to get in bed, and then it's another locked shot. Yeah. It's in front of this huge bookshelf with so many books, and it's in their bedroom, which you never see at the beginning of the movie. We're being told
you're right.
That the stalker is just this kind of like, dumb, and he's even described in multiple readings that I've done, where he's this religious fool. He's just kind of this guy who is just, he's singularly focused and doesn't really have, he's kind of a dullard compared to the other guys, this acclaimed writer and this person who's scientist and all of these things. But you look at that huge bookshelf with all these books in it, it's like, these people are learned people. Like, I can assume that they've read all of these books. So it's a character trait, and it's a character feature that we didn't know about, and we don't even have to be told about verbally or through dialogue. We can see it with one shot. That is amazing to me. And it's all in that same physical space. It's just what Tarkovsky decides to show us and when. That's so cool to me, that it reveals a whole nother side of a character without saying anything, and just with literally one camera shot. So cool.
And he gets into the bed on the opposite side that he got out of. Yeah. So he takes his pants off puts his pants on one side of the bed and takes them off on the other side of the bed. Yeah. I don't know if that's significant, but yeah, I was dumbfounded by the bookshelves, because I didn't assume they weren't learned. I didn't assume they weren't well read. I didn't assume anything about their educational level.
That was
I just
the kind
didn't
of
think
dialogue,
about it.
at least the perception, at least that you get, the description of the stalker, somebody who for some reason likes to go into this zone, and even though it's detrimental to them and their family and all that stuff, it's just like, seems like a dumb thing to do. But by the end, we learn a lot more about all three of the characters. All right, the very end, last shot, which is probably 5 minutes long. I don't even know how long it is, but is in color. And while they are in the other room, the daughter is in this kind of windowed room.
Dining area.
Yeah. And
it's like, I thought it was their dining table.
Their dining table. So this is like some sort of stone table or some sort of table that these glasses are on, and we get to see her freaking move the glasses telekinetically.
Okay, well, first of all, let's talk about the shroud that she's wearing. The headpiece that she's wearing. She's wearing, right. But you don't know that until one of the shots where she's walking and it goes from sepia to color back to sepia. And she's wearing it in the opening shot when he gets out of the bed also. And I thought, well, why is she covered? And then why, when he goes to color, is that color is the same color as the sepia that he uses in the film? And I thought, that's got to mean something. I don't know what the hell it means, but it's got to mean something. But then, so you're right. It's a locked off shot again, and it's a long shot, lengthwise, time-wise.
It's a zoom out,
Right. Oh, yeah, you're right. But you're right about identifying the fact that he only wants you to see what's in the frame, because you don't even really notice the glasses. They're there, but you don't really notice them until one of them starts to move. And it moves, and I've seen that before. Condensation moves a glass. It's freaked me out a couple times in my own life. I'm like, oh, I did that. I have telekinesis power. And I was like, no, that's just the water underneath the glass sliding on the picnic table. And then it moves significantly, but she doesn't. And then now see, here's what I found really interesting about it. Not that she moves something, but I think each glass represents the three guys in the film.
Wow. I did not put that together.
Here's why. Because of the way her eyes look. She moves the glass and then she looks at it. And then she looks over at the other glass, sort of like the same shot when you see the two guys looking at the camera in the beginning of the film, when the stalker's off the frame to the side of the frame that we were talking about earlier, and he looks directly at the camera and then looks back at Stalker. Both of those characters do that. She does something similar to that. She doesn't look directly in the camera, but she looks sort of off to where Stalker would have been in that original shot, and then looks at the one glass, and then that moves, and then the other one moves. But they're all sort of, I don't know, something about the way that the glasses were, the sizes of the glasses. It just reminded me of the three characters. I don't know if that's what it was supposed to be. That's just what I got out of it. And you remember how I keep wanting to say preacher. It's not preacher. What is it? Professor. I don't know why I can't keep that in my mind. It's the weirdest thing. That happens to me in plays where I can't keep a word in. I'll get the rest of the monologue, but I can't remember one word, and I'll switch it every time, and it'll be something like professor to preacher. You remember the professor is the one who goes and almost teeters into the room and then falls back outwards. Oh, that is the writer, isn't it? Oh, okay. Well, then my theory's debunked, because I thought that big glass represented... Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
That's kind of cool, though. Why are there three glasses? Like, that's the question we should be asking. The question I was asking is like, what does it all mean? But I think a more interesting question is, why are there three glasses? You're right. And then obviously, why does she decide to move one glass off the end of the table?
Yeah. See, it reminded me of that scene, but I guess I'm wrong, because I thought the writer is shorter. So I thought, now I'm dumbfounded, because it's just an instinct I had. And that's what I went on with this film, is just instinct. And then the very end shot, does she look at the camera or not? Because it kind of looks like she's getting ready to look, and then it cuts.
She's got her head laying on the table at that point. And I don't know, It's hard to tell because the camera is at such an angle in between the glasses. I mean, the glasses are essentially directly in line with the camera, so it's hard to tell if she's looking into the camera. I don't know if that would necessarily change anything, whether she's looking at the camera or not, for me at least, but I'm more interested in the fact that it's in color, and that either has somehow brought a portion of the zone outside of the zone, which really interests me, and wondering how like her life is going to be moving forward. And also it just opens up too many questions. Do they know she can do that? Has she shown that to them? Like, all they know is that she's quote unquote a mutant. She can't walk. That's all we know that they know. But do they know that she has these telekinetic powers? We don't know. I mean, it's the Inception spinning top.
Yeah. I've got that figured out, though.
The Inception thing? No, but what it...
Yeah, we're looking at the wrong question with that. We'll
that's
talk
fine.
about that some other time.
But essentially, it's that there's multiple options is what I'm getting at. And in a lot of ways, it's more interesting to think through each of the different paths than be told which one of those paths the story's going to go on.
I like it, too. The first thing I thought of was the mother/wife says, everybody said not to get with him because there was going to be problems, and that my child would be a mutant. I don't know if that's the word she used. That's how it was
translated, I think.
But, was it? Okay, I'm fine with that. I don't know why all of a sudden I had a hesitant, like that was an insult or something. I mean,
that's what they said.
Mutated. Okay, so she'd be a mutant. But just like the difference between your subconscious desire versus your conscious desire going to the room. Maybe it's, yes, your child will be paralyzed, but she will have other gifts that will outshine her not being able to walk. Maybe whatever the room, your deepest desire, there's a cost to everything. And he's somewhere in there, they talk about that. There's a cost to everything. So maybe if you get your deepest desire, there's still a cost. And maybe that's why Porcupine, which I find strangely named Porcupine. We didn't say that the last time, but it is strange. Like, why Porcupine? Why did he go in and then be careful what you wish for? Because when he came out only a couple days later, he hung himself. So was his deepest desire to kill himself, or was his deepest desire revealed and he killed himself?
It was all related to his brother. I
think
his brother was really sick, and so he may have gone in assuming that his deepest desire would be to save his brother, but when he got in there, he may have realized that his deepest desire was not to save his brother, and he couldn't, this is all me speculating, and he couldn't live with himself that his deepest desire was not to save his brother. But whatever it was, it might have been to be a millionaire. And in fact, I think that's what they said. They said that he got a bunch of money, but then like a couple of days later.
Oh, that's right.
So he goes in there and he's like, I'm going to save my brother. It's going to be great. I'm going to walk in the room and I'm going to say, I want to save my brother and it'll be cool. But he walked in there and his deepest desire was to have a bunch of money.
Well, I think speculation is the only thing you can do in this film. You can only speculate. And the bottom line is that I felt uplifted at the end of the film that she could do what she did. So for me, it left me on a higher level and a much more excited level than I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be pure like drudgery the whole entire time. Yeah, so like just hard. Because the opening sequence with the room, it's so, I still don't understand the water. I don't know if that's a religious thing. I don't know if that's a symbolic thing. Why are the floorboards in that one room with the telephone full of water too? And when they walk on it, the water comes up. And then the water in the actual room, and then the water in the bar. There's water everywhere in this, and the dampness of it. Then he lays in the middle of the bog or whatever it is. It reminded me of the Lord of the Rings when they were going through the marsh area, and they saw all the elves and all the people who had died in the old battles, and then Frodo falls in because he's being tempted or whatever's happening. When the guy lays down in the marsh area in this film, he lays on a patch. And that's weird because then that's the sepia tone, which we talked about. And then it goes back to color. And he's laying perfectly in one of those marsh patches, but part of his feet are touching the water, but nothing else is. People are wet the whole entire time in this film. I don't know what it means. All I know is that I think having some form of analytical discussion about it is probably what the filmmaker wanted. I'm sure the filmmaker knew what he wanted, but you should go and read the reviews. It's fascinating. It's so fascinating. And there's one guy's like, if you think this reviewer is going to help you explain this movie, he is not. Did I understand this? He does not. And he goes on, he talks about it in third person almost. And he talks about these things. Is it metaphysical? He does not know. And so he was kind of clever, actually. I thought it was a really good way of saying, hey, I just didn't get this. I'm not saying there isn't something there. And then there's one other thing which I would agree with, and then we can wrap it up, is that did the length of time of this film, was it 100% necessary? It didn't bother me. I don't mind long films, but did we need to go 5 minutes on that one shot? And if we did, then you need to tell me what I'm supposed to be looking at.
I think that the thing that kind of like locked me in on Tarkovsky's methodology was that train cart ride into the zone, and it is meant to be somewhat hypnotic. I think the film is meant to be somewhat hypnotic. It's meant to get you into a different plane of thinking and sensing, and we're just not used to that nowadays. And we're also used to like the MCU, and I mean, I just got done watching WandaVision, and every time there's a WandaVision episode, there's a 20-minute long breakdown video that I need to watch so that I can get all the Easter eggs and see that there were runes in the background, and then this is the Book of the Darkhold, and it's like they don't tell you all that stuff. It's all in the background, and you have to like pull all of it out of there, and every single inch of the frame means something. And so like that's what we're being conditioned to right now. But the cool part is that because of that, I can get everything I need to get out of a 20-minute YouTube video. But Tarkovsky doesn't give us any of that. So we just spent an hour and a half talking about what we thought this movie made us feel and what we think the movie means and how we think the interactions of the characters relate to biblical stories and all kinds of different things, and how it relates to the Soviet Union and gulags and annihilation and all this stuff. So that's not something that can be easily tied up into a bow in a 20-minute YouTube video. And the next time I watch this, I'll probably see something completely different. I feel like I don't know enough about this movie, and that makes me want to watch it again. So that, I think, it's high praise, and I would hope that that's what Tarkovsky wants out of viewers of his films is to want to go back.
Okay, not that we have to have a discussion about it, but I do need to ask you, did you notice that the wife/mother's coat had wet splotches on it in certain places? Okay, yeah, you will. Yeah, I was like,
everybody's
what
wet.
does this mean? What is with this water? I was like, is it the river Styx like I was talking about earlier? And then they look like sweat stains, but they're not in any place that a person would normally traditionally sweat like that. And there's one on the front and there's two on the back, right where her wings of her back are. They're just splotches, and if they're not water, there's some form of oil. They're water. I know they're water. Why it's there, I have no idea. But I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I think that, and WandaVision was brilliant, by the way. Brilliant. Well done. Extremely well done. Whoever wrote the tunes for the different sitcom shows is a genius. They need to win some award. I don't know if they have an Emmy for something like that. I know they do for like skits on Saturday Night Live, but that person needs to win an Emmy or something because it was brilliant. But I do think there are Easter eggs in this film. We're just not looking at them like that. I think they are, because why does her coat look the way that it looks? And that's when you said Easter eggs, I thought there's something there. Not sure why. It might be insignificant. But this director, Tarkovsky, that's a little tough for me to say. It doesn't sit in my tongue correctly. But I don't think there's not anything that's in frame that isn't on purpose. Everything has a reason. And it's just for us to figure it out. And I do hope that one day, and even if it's one of those things where they do it in New York or LA, they show this on the big screen again. We should travel and go see it on the big screen, because can you imagine? Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like 2 hours, 45 minutes in the theater. Oh my gosh. I might transfer into whatever was happening to me at the end of this film with hearing all the bings and whistles in life and thinking that they were out of step with what was normal. If I saw it on the big screen, I might disappear. I might be the leftovers.
Jeez. All right. Well, now that we've got all that figured out and we know exactly what Stalker means, we can move on to another movie next week. All right. You can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. Go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer, and we'll see you next time.